Hello, this is Brian J. I know it's not 2011, it's 2020, but it's 2022. But I guess I should just talk about SJW writers. I don't, I are just liberal writers, people who are bad writers. But this is why Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, will fail with its writing. And it's because of what the actors are revealing in every interview leading up to The Rings of Power. You notice they're not really talking about their characters at all. They're not talking about the story. They're not talking about what makes their characters tick, their environment, who they are, what their relationships are, what drives them, what motivates them, what's the story, what is surrounding these characters, right? In Rings of Power, all the actors, especially the fat black woman playing the female dwarf, she's just constantly talking about her being the first female dwarf ever on film, which is not true. There were female dwarves in the Hobbit movies. There was a female dwarf in Willow who was the wife of Willow, who's the wife. So, and she talked, she had dialogue, but people are like, well, the female hobbits in the Hobbit movies are supporting characters. They didn't have any dialogue or whatever. But that was not the point. She specifically said she's the first female dwarf ever seen on film. She never said that she's the first female dwarf on film to have a big story arc. She wasn't specific. But she says in every interview, I'm the first female dwarf. I'm the first black female dwarf, which is true on film, unless you include Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, which don't count, but, you know, whatever. She's the first female dwarf, first black female dwarf, and all she's talking about is her skin color and how fat she is, and she's talking because of the body positivity movement. She's talking about how fat she is, and she's talking about the fact that she gave birth a month before filming, a couple months, and they created a suit that helped her breastfeed. And I'm like, okay, what does this have to do with your character? Who is your character? What does she do? What's the story? What's going on? And apparently nothing, because the writers just wrote the character based on her weight, skin color, and gender. And that's just a bad way to write a character. I mean, look at House of the Dragon. Look at every interview at House of the Dragon with all the actors. They're all describing their characters as three-dimensional characters. They're describing what makes them tick. You know, the actor, Emma D'Arcy, talking about Rhaenyra Targaryen, what makes her tick. What's her motivation? What are her relationships? What's her motivation? Like, what's it like being a woman in a very ass backwards medieval setting, a patriarchal setting, and being told that you're the heir to the Iron Throne, you know, in that type of setting that's never given to a woman. Like what? And they're constantly talking about the psychology of what Rhaenyra is going through. And you know, Matt Smith, they're talking about Daemon Targaryen the way they talk about their characters fits with the books and how the characters are described. And even the actor playing Corlys Velaryon, they changed the Velaryons to black people. You know, but the actor playing Corlys Velaryon is describing Corlys Velaryon as a man of worth, a man who worked his ass off, who traveled 9 seas, 9 voyages, and became super wealthy. House Velaryon is the richest family in Westeros. They even got more money than the Hightowers from Old Town. And as an ancient family in Westeros, they got the Velaryons got more money than the Lannisters. And everybody knows how rich the Lannisters are. So it's, you know, that's what he's talking about. He's not talking about him being a black man, being black, this and that, whatever else. Every interview, he's like constantly talking about the character and how the character is described from the writers that are actually being faithful to the book. Meanwhile, Rings of Power, it's just the opposite. They're just constantly talking about being activists and their character skin color and how they look and what's their gender. That's the failure of a lot of liberal writers, you know, because you know, I'm half black, half white. I don't wake up wanting to do a biracial thing. Like, who does that? I don't do that. You know, I wake up and I'm reading Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, who is a white Christian Mormon who writes great books. He's a great writer. I'm a fan, but I'm not reading his book because I'm biracial. I'm reading it because I love fantasy and I'm a huge fan of fantasy, and he's a great writer that actually writes books and finishes stories, you know? Unlike George R. R. Martin. But anyways, that's another topic. So these are my thoughts on the whole Rings of Power cast, just saying all the wrong, stupid things, and how House of the Dragon is just doing everything better leading up to its release. So this is Brian J. I'll talk to y'all later.